Hello and welcome to Graphic Policy Radio, where comics and politics meet. This is a comics podcast, and this is your host, Ilana Levin, sometimes known as Twitter's Ilana_Brooklyn, because I spend too much time there, but that's another story for another New Year's resolution. Joining me today is a returning guest who is doing so much interesting work, I leapt at the opportunity to have her back again. It is Tina Horn. Tina Horn hosts and produces the long-running Kink podcast, Why Are People Into That? She's also the creator and writer of the sci-fi sex rebel comic series SFSX, Safe Sex, and we will be talking about that today as the big comics focus. Her reporting on sexual subcultures and politics has appeared in Rolling Stone, Playboy, Hazlitt, Glamour, Jezebel, and elsewhere. She is the author of 2 nonfiction books and has contributed to numerous anthologies, including the queer horror collection Theater of Terror and We Too, Essays on Sex Work and Survival, which she also co-edited. Tina has lectured on sex worker politics and queer BDSM identities at universities and community centers all over North America, and works as an on-set consultant for theater, film, and television, including the dominatrix scenes from Pose. That's pretty awesome. She is a Lambda Literary Fellow and AVN nominee and recipient of 2 Feminist Porn Awards and holds an MFA in Creative Nonfiction Writing from Sarah Lawrence. Tina is currently working on her first scripts for film and television. I can't wait to see those. And you can follow her on Twitter and Instagram at Tina Horn's Ass with 2 S's. Welcome back, Tina.
Hello. I feel like Twitter is like a bar or a cafe that I keep going to out of habit, even though I don't, the food like doesn't taste as good and the conversation hasn't been stimulating, but like I kind of just like, it's my local spot and I don't know where else to go. Like, but you were saying that I feel like I'm spending less and less time there.
Oh, I'm sure.
It's probably also the difference between Twitter and an actual like place that you go in the flesh, in your flesh suit, in reality, is that what you see and who you see is dictated by an algorithm that is designed to make you feel bad so that you keep coming back, which is a weird thing about how the human mind works that corporations are exploiting. Anyway,
well, that is more true of the Facebook algorithm than the Twitter algorithm. The Twitter algorithm tends not to be able to tell good interaction from bad, which is one of the reasons why I like to use it to yell at companies for being evil. But no, it's funny for me because of my work, like doing digital strategy for nonprofit organizations. Like I have to be on it. I don't have to be on it as much as I am. I suspect that one of the reasons I'm really good at it is I do spend too much time on it. But like, but I would say this for Twitter. I did not know more than a handful of queer comics fans until I got on comics Twitter.
That's
like,
cool.
I knew like through my growing up in the goth scene, I knew some other queers who read comics, specifically like Sandman.
Oh, yeah.
Or maybe they read like Love and Rockets. But I did not know that many queer people who were like, I need to talk with you about the X-Men, let alone like, I need to talk to you about, these Daredevil comics from the 1980s until Twitter. And so,
that's wonderful.
We end up there for reasons,
It's like the new Barbalith.
Yes, which I never got to be on Barbalith.
I never got to be on Barbalith either.
Neither of us are cool.
It's like, I like knew of it, but that was like too online for me at that time
exactly. I was in college. Okay, so for folks who have no idea what the hell we're talking about, Barbalith was the message board that Grant Morrison fan community started that birthed a lot of professional comics creators and cultural figures, and everybody was on it, and that's how they met everybody.
It's almost like it itself was a sentient satellite hyper sigil from that represented the overlap of 2 dimensions. Anyway, I'm just I'm only talking Invisible's subtext now. That's the only way that I
am able to communicate. That's fine.
That's true. It's the only way I'm able to communicate is just through the Kinks lyrics that are quoted in The Invisibles and I was reading about, I was reading this Wired article about hyperobjects. I assume if you're very online, you have encountered the discourse about hyperobjects. And now their name is escaping me. It's Timothy Morton, right? It's interesting. So I'm like reading this article, and I've like this idea of hyperobjects has washed up on my shore before, but this was like a really in-depth profile. And like, for example, I didn't know that the concept of hyperobjects was named after the Bjork song Hyper Ballad. I'm seeing Bjork this year or next year in 2022, which I feel like is just going to heal. If anything can heal me, it's Bjork. But anyway, and Timothy Morton started to like describe the experience of like coming up with this idea of hyperobjects and like starting to talk about it like in terms of philosophy and ecology. And as I was like listening to them, I was like, oh man, this sounds like so much like Grant Morrison and like 90s Invisibles discourse. And then like a few paragraphs later, Morton started describing the experience as being like Neo from the Matrix. And I was like, my dude, my genderqueer dude, like are you really, have you like not read the Invisibles that you're like talking about the thing that ripped off the Invisibles, but like not talking about the Invisibles? Anyway.
Let me help you. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. It's like, you know a lot clearly, but like there's something I know that you don't. And
just
and
for
it's about comics, which is of course I'm allowing myself to rant and riff so much is in the hopes that your dear listeners will feel pandered to by my obscure ramblings. But
I feel pandered to. Look, good. I've never really covered the Invisibles on the podcast in any significant way, which is crazy because back when I had like, speaking of sex and the internet, back when I had a Nerve profile because I was single and Nerve existed, I believe I might have listed The Invisibles as like one of my favorite books. So there you have it.
But for those who are not, The Invisibles on a dating profile before. Yes, absolutely.
So for folks who don't know, according to the Wikipedia, hyperobjects can describe objects that are so massively distributed in time and space as to transcend spatio-temporal specificity, such as global warming, like the big giant plastic blob that's like taking off the ocean, that kind of thing.
The fact that all of the concrete in the world is about to weigh more than all of the life on the world combined. I could be getting that wrong. It's something about the weight of concrete.
Wow.
But yeah, it's like hyperobjects are like things that are too big for you to wrap your mind around, but it's also related to object-oriented ontology, which is like a way of thinking about being that sees everything as an object, including a person, including the person who's thinking about the object. So if you're like thinking about yourself as the object, anyway.
But you're right. It's all very Invisibles. And like, I should do something with them at some point in time. It was such an important comic for me. And I was not on Barbalith because I was not part of internet chat room culture because I lived in cities and went to clubs. And like, I just didn't understand that, like, which sounds like a brush off of those other things, but it's actually not. Like, I think the ideal way to be would have been to do both of those things.
Totally.
Rather than just do one and not the other. I've realized that when I say like, I didn't do that because I went to nightlife, it sounds kind of like I'm down.
No. I mean, especially since
I missed something, you know?
I'm only having the pleasure of like baby Elena in like Susie Sue makeup and
Ilana.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. I'm like, who is this person? It's me. It's okay.
I am so sorry. You'd think I'm dyslexic. You'd think I listen to your show all the time. I hear you say your name all the time.
Aww.
I'm trying to be like a pomo homo, mixing up vowels, putting them where they don't belong, telling you what your name is, something different. It's you from a different like part of the multiverse.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
yes.
I hope that people are still listening to this. I think
no, this is what they signed up for. Like, look,
I'm so glad.
I mean, but wait, where was I going? There was sex and the internet,
goth
invisibles, goth clubs, the return of and the end of the world. So yes, SFXX is. I've been having a really hard week in terms of fear of the world and the future, and I wasn't sure if I was going to have the stamina to read the new edition of the comic, because this definitely is a dystopian story.
Yes.
But it actually worked just fine. And I think I think you would probably feel like you've achieved something because I did have sex later that night. So yes. I know, everyone wins. So for folks who don't know, Tina was on the podcast before to talk about the launch of this comic. Whenever I'm talking about indie comics, I don't assume that the listener has read everything so far. So totally. We'll be handling the conversation I'm not going to do a replay of the things we spoke about last time, but I'm going to try to avoid certain kinds of level of spoiler, if that makes sense. I really do hope, right? It's kind of like a balance, So I really do hope folks go back. You can listen to my earlier interview with Tina. It was fabulous. And check out the earlier run of, speaking of mispronouncing things, I say SFSX, SFSX.
You can say, you can say whatever you want. The idea with the title is that the name of the book is Safe Sex, but safe sex is hard to Google, and we always had apologies to anyone listening to this who's heard the story 20 million times. We abbreviated it as SFSX just in early editorial correspondence, and then I think it was Eric Stevenson at Image that was I think we should also just officially call it that. And there's a little bit of it does take place in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. So there's that SF thing, and then it's science fiction. So there you go. But yes, it's easier to type SFSX, but it's harder to say. So I feel like I've kind of fucked myself branding wise, but hopefully the series endures. Yes, and so the latest graphic novel in the series Safe Sex, or SFSX, is called Terms of Service. So if you're looking for it at your local book or comic book store, you want to ask for, the latest graphic novel written by Tina Horn, illustrated by Romero-Johnson, with colors by Kelly Fitzpatrick and lettering by Steve Wands, and edited and designed by Lauren McCubbin. It's on Image Comics, published by Image Comics, and the first book is called Protection. So you can definitely it's definitely a series, but if you for some reason just want to skip to the newest one and just read Safe Sex Terms of Service, it is meant to be sort of understood as its own graphic novel, as its own story, and it has a little previously on, but I don't think anybody's going to get too lost if they just want to dive in to. No,
it's a good story. Previously on. It's a good previously on. Yeah.
Thank you.
It was just good because you kind of remember who everybody. I'm oh, that's who Nick is. So yes,
right. You need a little refresher.
Poor Nick. Oh, but anyway, Nick. So yeah, I actually didn't realize it was being released as a trade paperback. I was looking for it amongst the floppies and failing, and I'm really glad it's a trade paperback because I think that's how your audience is more likely to read things than in floppies. Is that why you guys made the choice to switch to it?
It was a completely financial decision. This is my first foray into comics. It's I've been working on it since 2017. So first feels a little weird. It's been a long ass time, but it's a creator owned comic, and I don't have a ton of experience with writing for other publishers, and it just really sort of seemed like people spend the most people are gonna get issue number 1, and you're going to get the biggest royalty check for issue number 1, and then after that there's just gonna, it was just the most financially viable thing to like go straight to a graphic novel. And it also, I had to sort of get over the like stigma bias that I had in my head of like straight to video.
Oh.
That was like in my mind I was like, oh god, is this like a sign of failure that we're like going straight to graphic novel? But
no, it's smart. Like this, you know, like I feel like the only comics that really sell in a weekly floppy well are like superhero books, and I think the audience of non-superhero people prefers to read trades, and so I make sense to me. And I prefer reading trades to floppies, except for if there's like covers that I really want to collect. But you had some beautiful covers. I love Alejandra.
Love Alejandra Gutierrez.
Yes, her cover is just, I mean, her whole style is so great. But in this book, the new book has a lovely Tula Lote comic cover.
Yes,
which is, do you remember the cover of? So remember like the Lords of Acid album cover from Our Little Secret, and it's just like, it's the sort of thing where people are like, oh, it's a hot girl. And then you're looking closer, you're like, oh, this is actually sort of subversive. And I felt like your cover of this was sort of like, oh, it's a hot girl. Oh, she's taking her arm off.
Yes,
you know?
Yes,
and that's like the right vibe.
That is such a great comp that I had not thought of before. And I am now going to like put this on the mood board and just generally like maybe post about that. But yeah, I love that.
Yeah, it's I like literally was in the room while various people pieced that together. So
oh my god, I love that.
I mean, back in the 90s. So I'm like, this is a similar thing to it. And music music is even more of a thing in this edition than ever before with the book. Yes. And I love these mixtapes. I feel like, and this never happens, like 80% of the stuff you list is stuff I love, which is like the highest match rate of like anything that's ever happened. And including like cross genre stuff, you know what I mean? Like that doesn't happen. So like, thank you for the mixtapes, because I am going to, so there's like 80% of it is totally my shit. 10% of it is like, and then 10% of it is like, I don't know what that is and I need to find out. So thank you for the mystery 10% that I'm going to Google.
Yes.
But like nobody else is like, sorry.
Oh, no. I'm thrilled that the book got you laid. I'm thrilled that we have like an 80% crossover in music taste. And that's just, I'm feeling so good about that.
Thank you. You know, I mean, so the mixtapes concepts, they sort of break up the chapters, basically. They go at the end of each. Like, so because the mixes kind of go at the end of each chapter, like, how do you envision people interacting with them and reading the comic? And I guess we should read off a list of people to give them an example of one of them. So let me read off the first one. Why not? Dirt by Lou Reed. WAP by Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion. Pay Your Way in Pain by St. Vincent. Needed Me, Rihanna. Walking on Thin Ice, Yoko Ono plus Jason Pierce. Tears of Rage by the band. Reclamation, Fugazi. Any Major Dude Will Tell You by Steely Dan. I've been having a serious Dan Peltier year, as I tend to. Ascension, The Comet Is Coming. Dom Blonde by Dolly Parton. Dog Eat Dog by Adam and the Ants, which is absolutely one of my favorite new wave songs and gets no respect in the States.
Except for by me.
Except for by you, exactly. Sex Goddess by Angeline. They Say That Falling in Love is Wonderful by Gloria Lynn. It's Not Easy by I'm
actually not sure how to pronounce it.
Okay.
Ophage, I'm not sure.
Sinister Purpose by CCR. Where's the Love? Betty Wright. Tryouts for the Human Race by Sparks. Tightrope by Leon Russell. You Ain't Going Nowhere by The Byrds. Dude. Okay. Till My Back Ain't Got No Bone by Esther Phillips. Hell Yes, Give Her the Recognition from Brian Eno. In the Image, Beverly Glenn Copeland. Ego Tripping at the Gates of Hell from the Flaming Lips. And It Takes a Lot to Laugh. It Takes a Train to Cry, as covered by Yola Tango. So, wow, guys.
That was just so enjoyable listening to you read my mixtape for chapter 1. What was the question?
Oh yeah, how do you want people how are people, so because these are at the end of chapters, like how do you think of people interacting with them? Are people like, is the idea that someone listens to this after they've read it, or that they read the issue and then they go back with the mixtape and read it again, or like is there like what's the concept for using these to break up the story?
In brief, I don't care, or like it's like it's all good. Like however anybody like wants to do that, or wants to interact with the book. I think that let me think about it. I guess that like when I put it together, I envisioned that each song corresponds to a page of the book. So like you could think of it like you could think of it like this is as a sort of like cinematic soundtracking, or you could think of it as something that's like a little bit extra subtext, or a little bit of an extra, whether that subtext is like a joke, or something that points you towards sort of what I was thinking or what I want people to be thinking. And you know, sometimes it's a mood, sometimes it's just vibes, and and I mean, I can't lie. Sometimes it's just me showing off my fantastic taste.
Which is legit.
Thank you. So, and I mean, but then there's another element of it where like the mixtapes are not just playlists on the page. I also make the playlists in Spotify, and that's like what I do first before I actually like type them up and give them to Lauren McCubbin, our wonderful designer, and have her like incorporate them into these sort of like Riot Girl zine collages.
Yeah, the zine collages,
which in this book is as much like glitchy porn inspired as it is sort of like analog collage inspired, but yeah, so I make the mixes first, and so then like anybody reading the book at any, who also has access to the internet is then also able to like access the playlist on Spotify itself. So like you don't need to like recreate this playlist. You can like it's already like there for you, so you could potentially like fire it up while you read.
Yeah,
so in that way it's intended to be like a sort of like multimedia experience of the book. But then it's also kind of like a promotional material. And then it ultimately also is like a fun chance for me to get to like have like Image Comics publish my mixtapes.
Well, I really think like comics are a way that people learn about music. I mean, I had a panel at New York Comic Con a couple years ago that was basically about like, here's cool pieces of pop culture that I learned about through reading comics. So,
nice.
You know, I mean, the comics introduce people to music, like in particular. So I think that's cool. Tell me more about the zine concept, like, because this really has like, we've had a moment in the internet where there's been a lot of zine discourse, insert eye rolling. And I thought it was an interesting, aesthetic choice to break up the story with them. I realize we haven't talked about the story at all, so maybe I should talk about the story a little and then go back and talk about that. But I am kind of hung up on the question. Sure. It's like talking about the story. So yeah, like you're in the just, you know, like you and I are having this conversation the same day that the Supreme Court was officially like, "Hey, you are basically our cattle, and we will tell you that you have to do whatever you want with your body." Yeah. So it's been a rough week. It's been a rough, you know, whatever. And your comic is right now at a point where our one of our protagonists is, you know, she's stuck in a fucking re-education camp, basically, for having been a pornographer and revolutionary. And, you know, it's like a kind of scary place to be. And yet, even with that, like, you still have her being able to have her imagination and be able to experience some of her fantasies, and sort of asserting her humanity by doing that. But don't worry, kids. Like, this isn't the end of it. Like, we're not going to have people are not going to be. I mean, I don't believe that this is a story in which the boot of 1984 it continues to step on the head eternally, unless the boot is stepping on the head in a horny sort of sexual way.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I think that. Well, you just really actually hit on something really crucial, which is the idea of taking social oppression and like recognizing the ways that social oppression becomes eroticized because we like are exposed to power or we come to understand ourselves in relation to power, and then we work out those anxieties about power through our horniness. And so like that is a huge part of that's always been like a really big part of my work as a nonfiction writer and as an educator and as a journalist. And so then when it came time to like write some science fiction, I was like, okay, well, this is what the themes of that are going to be.
Yeah. I mean, how do you like write like somebody using masturbation to escape from their like immediate life-threatening destruction trauma of while being in prison? Like it's really complicated.
Yeah, you know, it's complicated. Actually, I was about to glibly say, how do I write about somebody using masturbation to escape from their trauma and the trauma of everyday living? Like, well, that's my life, baby, you know. But then you got to the incarceration part, and like, I've never been incarcerated, so yeah. You know, and I've never gone through torturous conversion therapy. So you actually make a really good point, and it was definitely something that was on my mind when I was writing, you know, these like the sort of like voiceover monologue that opens the book alongside these like two double page splash spreads of, you know, sort of Avery's inner masturbatory life fugue state. I was really sort of thinking about like, okay, I put myself in a position, spoiler alert, with the end of the first book where like my point of view character, my protagonist, is essentially incarcerated. And so yeah. Like what do I do with that? And I hope that it's not insulting to incarcerated people to say that like the way that I tried to understand what that might be like and how you might try to like cope with your humanity in that situation was to compare it to my experience of quarantine, or some of my experiences of quarantine, and like the like disembodied alienation of the experience of the past couple of years. And that's like disembodied alienation, and the like sort of digital substitutes for that is also like a really big theme of this book. So I kind of wanted to like establish like, okay, in a book where we're exploring like the sexuality of an artificially intelligent machine, like what if it and in a book that's going to go to a lot of very like abstract places, because a lot of it takes place in cyberspace, you know, a cyberspace that is like a little bit holodeck and a little bit danger room, speaking of X-Men, and that can like essentially be whatever you want it to be, and is like designed to satisfy sexual fantasies. Anyway, like what if we like start that, what would it look like if we started that world by like exploring the interiority of an organic mind, specifically in a like masturbatory state. So and again, for comics fans, I do want to shout out that a huge inspiration for the form and layout of these pages was the early 80s Swamp Thing issue, where Swamp Thing gives Abby the tuber from its body, and then they like make sweet psychedelic love and the
on the dreamscape
and like the form of the comic is like totally exploded in the interest of showing their like reality bending psychedelic monster sex experience. Anyway.
Yeah, and the other thing, Irma, actually, it also made me think back when we were talking about the masturbation in jail thing, about the V for Vendetta sequence where, you know, he stages the letter to that's the letter that the lesbian woman who was imprisoned next to him had left, where she talks about like keeping a small piece of yourself alive despite the horrors that you're being confined to.
Yes. More Alan Moore.
I'm like that also feels like sort of channeling that as well. So but yeah, it's really interesting, like the science fiction aspects of SFSX are definitely really expanded on and really creative in this. You have a fabulous sexbot.
Yes.
And I'm really glad that you understand and your character that sexbots are people too. So, and I think like, you know, the comic is like answering questions that some people have about like the humanity of objects and sentience, and like what is it that like really toxic cis hetero men want anyway?
Right.
Like, can that be, can a sex bot actually, does that meet their needs? And then like, does that sex bot then deserve freedom is basically like the central questions here. Like talk to me a bit about how you developed those concepts.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked. I mean, so the sort of the troubling social problem that this new graphic novel is trying to explore is, on one hand, sex robots, and in a way, sex robots are kind of a hyper object, but anyway. And then incels. right? Like so-called men's rights activists. And I kind of wanted to put them together and see what would happen. And the thing that I kept coming back to was that I don't actually think that I think that if incels had all the resources in the world available to them to build the thing that they say that they want, I don't actually think that it would satisfy them. And
right.
And I think that has to do with power. I think it has to do with entitlement. And I think that honestly, like, this entire book is inspired by like the myth that if you, well, actually, there's a William Gibson quote in the book. Let me see it. Let me pull it up. So in 2019, William Gibson tweeted, "How will affordable sex robots affect the incel community? Aside from their primary function readily getting incels' rocks off, thereby reducing hostility to women, will the robots' problematic homicidal tendencies actually reduce incel numbers?" And yeah, I mean, I just don't, you know, and as a, for those who don't know, my background is in the sex industry, and you know, sexuality is a theme of so much of my fiction and nonfiction work. And, you know, I see in the discourse a lot this sort of myth that if we just sent incels to sex workers, that they would stop going on murder sprees. And, you know, the sort of the pushback to that from sex workers is, we are not like a depository for male aggression. Mm-hmm. And also that, like, that is a misunderstanding of what of incel ideology and like what incels like actually want. You know, I think you can learn a lot about how people think about sex robots from how people think about sex workers, and you can tell a lot about what people think about like people in general. Maybe we could say women specifically, even though lots of different people do sex work, lots of different people of lots of different genders do sex work, but like, I think you can learn a lot about what people think about women by how they talk about sex workers. So that was sort of the inspiration for the sort of like antagonists and like the big bad and like the main sort of conflict of Terms of Service. And also this idea of like the redistribution of intimacy, and like what would happen if the government was actually like involved in making sure that certain people got sexual satisfaction while like ensuring that other people don't have like any sexual freedom at all.
Yeah. Too fucking real.
I mean, that's the other thing, is that it's too fucking real.
Yeah. And I think the point about how like what some of these people are like want is they want power to control other people. It's not that they want sex. Meanwhile, like the actual, you know, not mentally balanced, but like the functional, like with the world, like like the good people, the good people of this comic, who obviously are not flawed, but like, you know, Casey knows what she wants. She just wants to water torture somebody and keeps getting interrupted.
Yes.
It's my favorite running gag of the book is just like, she's just in the background trying to have like consensual kinky water torture, and just stuff keeps happening and she just keeps getting interrupted.
Thank you so much for noticing that. Casey as a character, I think, gets a little lost sometimes, but that was, you know, it's an ensemble book, and there's a lot of characters and there's a lot going on, and so I think it's almost, the running gag they were talking about is almost a little bit of a meta commentary on that in the book, where like Casey is sort of the like Leonardo, if you will, like the just sort of like stoic leader, and like many sex workers, she is just like super burnt out and is just like trying to have a good work-life balance and like have a day off. Like she just like keeps getting interrupted, and it was like a fun sort of like device for levity to like keep coming back to Casey with like sort of smoke increasingly like coming out of her ears.
And like some like, what are those waterproof clog shoes? Because she's just like, no, I'm just trying to water torture some people. I'm ready. I'm wearing my Crocs. You know,
Romero-Johnson is going to be so happy you brought up the Crocs. One day on that page where you see Casey in Crocs, like one day, G was just like, so Casey wears Crocs and I won't be taking any questions at this time. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to allow it.
You know, but first you're sort of like, of all of the like, you know, you could have a character getting distracted from being able to enact any one of a number or millions of fetishes that exist. But like I'm just trying to water torture people consensually thing is cool, because the water as this transformative engulfing thing is such a theme through the book.
Yes.
So I'm assuming that's one of the reasons why that was chosen.
That absolutely is. Okay. So like the lineage of water as a theme in this book goes like this. I have been really obsessing over the film Ex Machina. This book is very, very inspired by a like deep study of that book and or that movie and its themes. And in Ex Machina, Oscar Isaac, who is, you know, in the movie has created an artificially intelligent machine, is sort of describing the machine's like brain and calls it wetware. And when I first saw this movie, I was like, oh, that's a pussy joke. Because she's like a sexy robot, so wetware, like I get it, hilarious, like, and then I found out that wetware is actually like a cyberpunk term, and like a term that is used to describe like something that's not hardware and is not software, but is the sort of like conceptual mind, or even the like, you know, sentient intelligence of or like ability to like feel, or like the humanity of a machine. So I'm like, okay, so we just got to make like wetware the like theme of you know, or like one of the themes or like recurring motifs of this book. And you know, we have this cyberspace, so we called it wet space, and from there it was like, okay, well, we're gonna have, like I said, wet space is sort of like the holodeck, and it's sort of like the danger room. Like it can appear any way that you want it to. So that just kind of gave us a jumping off point to be like, okay, well, we're going to have like swimming pools and hot tubs and bathtubs and hot springs and, you know, just like all of these, just like all of these like watery places, the ocean. And then as you pointed out, the like recurring motif of like Casey just like trying to play or trying to have a day off is like, okay, well, we're just going to have her like doing a series of like water related fetish scenes, right? Which is where like my fetish expertise comes in, because I'm like, okay, well, like, you know, she could be doing like waterboarding here, she could be doing like a high pressure hose here, like all of these different things. And yeah, and so and then from there it becomes this really kind of fun, I mean, it's elemental, right? Water. Mm-hmm. And so then because it's elemental, you also like the visual artists now have something to riff on. So for Lauren McCubbin making these collages in the back matter and the chapter headings and everything gets to, you know, look at like visual and aesthetic motifs like related to water, and Kelly Fitzpatrick doing the colors, you know, is like teaching me about things like vapor waves and you know, like gets to like make things look wet essentially, and it all comes back to a pussy joke.
Right. As do so many things. That's really lovely.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that we picked up the story with Dennis here. And you know, Dennis becomes a much more central character in this book. Mm. Dennis is the younger, non-binary person who's from the first book, who you find out has a brain, a microchip that was forcibly put in their brain that prevents them from feeling pleasure or pain. Mm-hmm. And it's like one of the, you know, it's one of the really like upsetting things that's revealed in the book. And Dennis really is the character that interfaces most with the wetware stuff in the story. And one of the things that I like a lot is, you know, I mean, Dennis is like very realistic and like behaves like a real human being. And I see a lot of creators that I know who are queer like coming under attack from people who are upset when characters who have different queer minority experiences are like not like perfect representation or whatever. And I do think that some of the people doing that are literally children and therefore are less likely to find themselves reading your comic. Although I certainly would have been reading it when I was a teenager and my parents wouldn't have cared. But aside from the people who are behaving childishly because they are children, like, how do you handle, you know, like writing a character who's like non-binary, you know, I think they're a person of color and they're a full person. They're not like, I am a perfect role model. You know, I think Dennis is great and like super relatable, and like all the things that Dennis does that are mistakes are like completely understandable things. And it's sort of like, yeah, like how do you handle that with some of the pressures that people have around representation?
This is such an astute observation that you're making, and everything that happens in it's Denis, actually, not Dennis, but that's fine.
I'm not adequately French. Denis, that makes sense. I thought it was like Dennis, but spelled creatively, you know?
It was, honestly, I like named that character after this Blondie song that is a cover of a song like about someone named Dennis, but then when Debbie Harry sings it, she sings it Denis, and I was like, gender.
I love it.
I'm hoping in a like Dune world, people have encountered like Denis Villeneuve and will perhaps get it, but also it doesn't matter because it's a comic. But anyways, so I mean, like, basically yes to everything that you're saying. I like agree completely that, I mean, okay, like in brief, my feeling about like representation of writing characters who are like underrepresented in culture is that it's insulting and would like do a disservice to the characters to be too precious with them. And so like, and it is definitely, and it's an issue of like having characters that are underrepresented in culture, whether they're trans or non-binary or people of color. And it's like an especially tricky thing for me to manage, like wanting to have characters who have all of those identities that I don't have. So like I'm white and I'm queer and I'm cisgender, and I want to have my ensemble like represent all of these different identities, but like then when you make characters, it's like you have to, like, writers are sadists, I've always said, and you like have to do horrible things to your characters. That's what fiction is. Like, that's what storytelling is. And especially like an action adventure science fiction story. So it's like, you can't have it both ways. You can't have a world in which there are like better, more well-rounded representations of like various like identities and like types of characters in the same world where like they're always like model citizens and like always like do the right thing and like are like role models, I guess. I mean, I'm also like something that I can say from personal experience is like I am a problematic bisexual who is like a huge fan of problematic bisexuals in cinema. So, you know, I'm like a big Sharon Stone in Basic Instinct fan. So like, you know, I feel like I guess like my feeling is it's a sign of progress when we're allowed to be villains because or you know, and Denis is not a villain in this story, but when we're allowed to like,
they're just like a flawed full human being.
Yeah, exactly. And so when we're allowed to be like multi-dimensional, like that's a sign of progress. I mean, I also am like a huge fan of queer villainy, you know, or even like queer coded villainy. I mean, obviously like all of the best Disney characters are the queer coded villains. They definitely have the best songs.
Yeah, that is true. You know, but yeah, I hope that no angry teenagers beset you, and I suspect that it would be unlikely, but I mean, I just was like, you know.
I mean, okay, so I will say this. I did get an angry young person. I did. What can I say about this? I did get a chance to read something by someone who was upset about what Denis' character goes through in the first safe sex book, Protection. But they were upset about it because the writer of this piece that I read, is asexual, and they were upset about like this asexual character like suffering so much, and so that actually like made me really it made me upset because Denis is not asexual. And I, you know, for the record, I'm not asexual, at all. But like Denis was, and you know, there's a little bit of like meta commentary on this in the book, which anyone who like listens to this and also reads the book will catch. It's not very subtle. But like Denis had a chip unconsensually put in their brain when they were like in essentially like a conversion therapy, quote unquote therapy program that their parents put them in. And so like they can't experience pleasure or pain, and they're like trying to like do their best and like find queer and kink community, like despite this like horrible thing that has been done to them by the state. And by the way, they were there in this conversion therapy because they are genderqueer and use they them pronouns. And so like for me, like this person's like pain at misrepresentation like also came from a place of like misreading this sort of confluence of sci-fi and horror and identity politics in the book. And so I didn't like, I wanted to sort of like respond to that within the text. And I think that in a way, responding to that is part of the reason that Denis ended up being like such a, I mean, Denis is basically like the protagonist of the B plot of the story, right? Definitely. And so I ended up putting a lot of really raw emotion and really personal emotion into what Denis was going through. And I think that like the other thing that I wanted to represent besides like them not being asexual, like to me it's like disrespectful to asexual people to like represent somebody that is not asexual as asexual. Like if that doesn't sound like too tautological, like Denis, you know, and everybody defines asexuality differently, and there's like lots of different like subsets of it, but like Denis is full of desire, and they like really would like to be able to like have those experiences. And like when they get, you know, just to give you like a little tease of the like premise of their story in terms of service, like when they get the chance to have that, they like kind of behave in a way that I hope is very relatable to anybody who has ever like felt like this is my chance to fulfill this desire and like nothing else matters to me right now, now that I see this path towards satisfaction of this desire, which also in a way is like a warped version of incel ideology, right? Like incels want something. I'm not sure if they even know what it is. And then they become so myopic that, you know, and I'm not in a place to like comment on whether or not like incel ideology creates sociopaths, or whether like the one sociopathic incel then like, you know, stands in for like all of incel ideology. I'm honestly not sure if it's a chicken or an egg situation. But I know for sure that it happens. You know, I know for sure that there are young men in the world right now, as I speak to you, who become so fixated on the tragedy that they haven't gotten what they wanted, that they are prepared to go on murder sprees to, like, as revenge, like, as, like, because they just have this, like, psychopathic energy and nowhere to put it. I don't know. Anyway, it's dark, and that, like, the scariness and darkness of that also really informed this book, and especially the sort of more, like, violent parts of it.
Yeah. It's stuff I think about, and I think you really did an amazing job with that.
Thanks.
Something you mentioned earlier was with SFSX is like SF, as in it takes place in San Francisco. And I really hadn't thought about that too deeply till now. And then I was like, oh, right. Like, well, I mean, obviously it takes place in San Francisco because you can see that. But I think about San Francisco as particularly interesting in light of, like, the sort of technology and body intersection, and also San Francisco, being a city that's a really strong, I mean, everywhere in the entire world has a strong tradition of sex work, but, like, San Francisco has a particular kind of sex society and stuff like that.
Definitely.
Very visible, active leather community, especially.
Totally.
And, was where some of the earlier sex worker organizing was happening in the 100%. Modern age, and unions for strippers and stuff. Mm-hmm. So, like, let's talk a little bit about, like, the San Francisco-ness of this location, and, like, what that means, especially in a book that takes place in the future when, like, nobody can afford to live anywhere.
Yeah. Well, so first of all, the Terms of Service basically takes place in 2 different locations and is, like, meant to be quite claustrophobic, but then also it, like, the other primary place that it takes place is in wet space, in this sort of, like, cyber world, or, like, in the inner lives of, like, various characters. And so one of the places that it takes place is called the Pleasure Center, which is basically the, like, I mean, speaking of 1984, it's very much the, like government, like, colonized and, like, then given an ironic name, place, but the pleasure center, and the Pleasure Center is where Avery is incarcerated, like we were talking about before, and it's the sort of, like, central place where the, like, social programs that the party, which is the, like theocratic government organization that, like, rules this dystopian San Francisco, that's, like, kind of, like, where they operate, and it's also the sort of the center of where, like, all of the, like, weird science of the book is taking place. And but the Pleasure Center is in a building. It's based on a building in the Mission District of San Francisco, where kink.com used to make lots and lots of very kinky porn. And it in the story is meant to have been the previous location of the Dirty Mind. So in the very first scene of the series, you see the party, like, raiding the Dirty Mind, which was, like, located in this building, and then they, like, colonize it and whitewash it and gentrify it and turn it into the Pleasure Center. So that's where, like, half of the action is taking place, and then the other half of the action in this book, in Terms of Service, is is taking place in the new Dirty Mind, which is also located in a real place in San Francisco, called the Sutro Baths, which are these, like, ruins of a bathhouse, like, right on the ocean in San Francisco. And so, like, Safe Sex, this series sort of, like, imagines, like, what if these, like, queer sex workers and perverts, you know, kind of had to push their like underground club safe house even further, like
Truly
literally to,
yeah.
Exactly, to like the edge of town and like squat in the ruins of this bathhouse. So I mean, that from sort of like location inspiration perspective is definitely like where we're coming from. But then, yeah, there's definitely something to be said about the tension between tech corporations and their like the sort of like borderline, if not outright, incel ideology of a lot of those guys, and like being in a place where like so much really important like sex culture history has taken place. Yeah. So I think that you can see those tensions and those contrasts between some of the characters in this book, and definitely like with relationship to like class and like who gets to live in the fancy part of town and who has to squat in the ruins on the edge of town.
Yeah. Whew. That's the real shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you worked with a different artist for most of the interiors of this. So the other earlier series had a range of different artists working on it, and this is working with one person the whole way through. And so tell me like how that impacted some of your choices as a writer, and sort of how you worked down the aesthetics for the book, with a new artist.
Yeah, absolutely. So I cannot sing the praises of G. Romero-Johnson enough. They are brilliant. They are a rising superstar. It was such a pleasure to work with somebody who is queer and like has made a lot of erotic, kinky art before, and so they just like didn't need to be told like what to do or how to do it, which was like just so refreshing for me. And they like made all kinds of little choices in the details of like what you see in the background or what the characters are wearing, or like all these little like sort of like cultural touchstones that I like just didn't have to make them a little like not safe for work Dropbox reference folder. They just like knew what they were talking about, and that was like incredibly refreshing. And they also really love, we share a lot of taste in sci-fi and horror as well, so we were able to have a shorthand about everything from body horror to fetish imagery, which is like that's like what a safe sex artist needs to be able to do. So I like couldn't be more thrilled about that. And like also working with, I mean, it's really honestly the same like with this whole team, like a lot of like cultural competence going on, which was like really refreshing for me.
Yeah. I mean, I think especially their work with the Wetworks and like some of the sort of physical humor with our wonderful Sexbot, like capturing the sort of combination of innocence, curiosity, also being a robot, also being sexy, like all of those I mean, it's all in there. It's really freaking cool.
Totally. Yeah, I think that like if G were only good at one of the things that they were good at, I would still want to work with them, you know, but they actually are also really good at the thing that you just described, that is so important for a comic book artist and illustrator, which is like the sort of acting of all of the characters. Like G was able to like capture the expressions and the emotions, and sometimes that's almost like manga levels of humor, and then you know what I mean, like like expressions that like almost become like facial expressions that become like almost like surreal, like they're not like literal. Do you know what I mean? And then, but then also these just like heartbreaking moments between some of the characters. And they're like so inventive but also like technically proficient and like a really great collaborator, and I'm like so thrilled to have been working with them on this book.
Yeah, I think it's a really cool matchup to have to to handle all those dynamics in one place. How do you guys decide? Because there's a lot of violence in the book and a lot of sex in the book and some body humor. Like, how do you decide what you want to show? What do you want to imply? How much detail you want to have for different things? That kind of stuff.
Oh, I mean, I am definitely a like... I if I can get away with showing it, I want to show it. When it comes to both sex and violence. I mean, like that's my taste, you know? Like I want everything to be as explicit and extreme and adult as possible, and my nerves are flayed from, you know, a lifetime of exposing myself to all of that spicy shit. So that's what I want too.
But there's like moments where like the plot is being moved forward and somebody's hooking up, and like you make a choice, like, are we going to show them hooking up, or are we going to show them handling the plot, or like how did that, you know what I mean? And you're like, no, because this ultimately is telling a story, right?
Yeah.
So like it's not like every single opportunity in which somebody could be having sex on a page you're visibly showing that, because you would not get anywhere, because there's so much sex happening. There would be a lack of advancement of the plot, especially when like the whole plot with folks who are at the Dirty Mind would be concerned. So True. You know, it's like when a certain character who hadn't been able to have sex for some time is finally able to do so, and like he does get walked in on by someone who's like, I need you to go do this thing. No, this is not Casey who needs to water torture people. This is a different person. You know, you're sort of like, you know what?
I think that I'm going to push that spoiler just like a little bit further and say,
sure.
And say that there is, I'll be coy and say that there is a character. This is also like a little bit of a response to like a perceived critique. There is a character in this book who, like has always been canonically bisexual. Actually, there's two characters in this book who were canonically bisexual in the first book, but like you only really saw them in like a cishet pairing, who in this book get to have very gay sex. And I guess maybe that is like all I'll say. But actually, like, it's so funny that you're bringing up. I know the scene that you're talking about, where they like get walked in on, and like, I honestly think that the only reason that scene is not more explicit is that the way that it sort of pans to the fireplace, if you will, was like an opportunity for a joke, and so they're sort of like, what? Like, she said it could wait. And like, I think that if there wasn't an opportunity, I guess like that's always the like choose your own adventure for me, is like either I'm going to have some like really explicit sex or some really disgusting, disturbing violence, or I'm going to make a joke.
Or the third option. That's true.
And like if it doesn't serve one of those things, or I guess I'm gonna like have some sort of like really heartbreaking, like melodramatic moment. But if it doesn't serve one of those things, then I'm a little bit like, what's the point even?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're definitely using sex to tell a story as well, and like, it can be like, heartbreaking in times as well, right?
Yeah.
But, you have these expositions of a character who's being told that, like, their partner just doesn't have the emotional energy to have sex with them that evening. And the person is sort of flashing back to great sex that they had before, a horrific experience that they had.
Yeah.
And then kind of feeling shut down and alone, all in the same panel.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's a lot of different feelings in one space that you're trying to put in one page.
Yeah, that scene. Okay, so like there's a scene in the beginning, which we've already talked about, where Avery is masturbating, but what you see is sort of Avery's inner life of like all of the different things that she is thinking about when she's masturbating. And then there's the scene that you were just talking about where a character has like a surprising emotional moment, and like in a flash you kind of see all of the things that sort of like surprise moment is like bringing up for them. And then throughout the book you have all of these characters, so that also is just like a flash on their inner life, right? And then throughout the book you have all of these abstract experiences of characters in wet space, in this sort of like cyberspace, this like representative space where it's like they're sitting in a bathtub that looks like the bathtub from The Shining, but it's like they're not actually like in the bathtub, right? It's like it's something that their imagination is creating, right? So I think that like what I was trying to do was give some of our characters moments where you get to sort of see an organic version of an inner life, which is then hopefully like contrasted with the synthetic inner life of the cyberspace, right? Like what does the imagination look like when it is facilitated by technology? And then what, and by the way, this is not like a leading question. This is like a question that I'm like genuinely curious about, because I don't think that like organic is good and synthetic is bad. I don't think that like, I don't think that, all like digital communication is like alienating us and like cutting us off from what makes us truly human. I like really don't think that at all. And so, but I just kind of like formally, going all the way back to Swamp Thing and like the Alan Moore tendency to break the form of comics and be like, well, instead of just like a bunch of boxes, like what if there's like a kaleidoscope of like different panels of like shapes that you weren't even expecting. And I mean, I think like, again, being a homo, I think I'm just like always interested in like what in like pushing the boundaries of reality. No, but like pushing the boundaries of like what is possible in whatever medium I'm working in.
Awesome. So we're clearly getting a part 3. It looks like.
Oh, actually, do you know what? There is one other thing that I want to say about the character who we were just like alluding to. No spoilers, but the character who like was canonically bisexual, but now like you actually like really like get to see them like, confirmed being bisexual. Well, and again, there's 2 characters like that. But I really do want to say that like we were working on this book when the Loki show came out, and I know that you had a wonderful episode about the Disney Plus Loki show. And by the way, I love that show. It's definitely my favorite thing that the MCU has ever done, because I like magic and technology in my comics media, but
and like Julia Serrano, I was a little bit like starstruck. I was like, Julia Serrano's on my podcast,
dude. That was a great episode. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it very much. And
thank you.
And you know, when there was like that whole thing where they were like, it's like such a big deal that Loki is bisexual in the MCU. And like at that moment we were like working on the like art for this sex scene where like this character like is like blatantly, explicitly like having gay sex. And I was just like, the MCU could never. So that's just
especially that.
I just want to say, like, you know, for all of your listeners who, you know, might be like interested in like bisexual representation, like, you know, this is a very like, actually, I feel like we really are like breaking ground with like bisexual representation of like characters that you like previously like did not like. You know, you're like, oh, this character's like queer, I guess, and then it's like, oh yes, no, they are.
Yeah. I mean, and that they're, you know, it's interesting because I feel like he, in the original part of the story, seems like he's sort of like adjacent to this queer kinky community, but that doesn't mean that he's not bisexual.
Totally.
Like, I think that there could be like a gap between like people feeling like they're accepted, embraced, or like finding their way towards, or feeling that they need to be a part of certain communities versus like them actually still having those identities. So it sort of is like, it sort of feels like the main community here is like Avery's community, and like, you know, he's the newbie, he's her boyfriend, he maybe is coming from a different space, but that doesn't mean he's not bisexual.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
Like so, and yet we don't have nearly enough you know, bisexual characters that, or like them being bisexual is not the source of drama in some way, or
right,
who are in, you know, relationships with somebody of a different gender from themselves and all that. I mean, I think it's really great.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the tricky thing about being. I don't know. I guess it's an interesting thing to think about, like being somebody who like is coming to genre fiction writing from a lot of nonfiction writing about a lot of things, including queer identity and like sometimes like queer theory, and sometimes like the you know, identity politics, and also just like a lived experience of being a bisexual person. And like there's a little bit of a mirroring of like my real life experience of being bisexual and the sort of just like, you know, agonies and ecstasies thereof with like the agonies and ecstasies of a bisexual character, because it's like, if you really want to get the like full representation of like the full spectrum of the fluidity, I'm just going to keep using buzzwords of like what it means for a bisexual person to like, I don't know, like be fully realized, like as a person or as a character. It's like you kind of just like need more time to like cover more territory. So like if you meet me and I'm like, you know, I'm a queer cis woman, and like if you meet me and I'm on a date with a man, like, first of all, why are we meeting when I'm on a date? But anyway,
right. Yeah. If you run into me or whatever.
If you run into me and I'm on a date with a man, it's like in that moment, it's like it's like, well, I'm not like being, I would say for myself, like, that's not like a straight moment for me, right? But if I'm like a minor character in a story and the only time that I appear in that story is when you run into me when I'm on this date, it's like you could be like, well, like, you know, Tina's canonically bisexual, but like in this moment I'm like only like having like a straight experience or like straight representation, right? And like that is kind of true for like a lot of the characters in this book, but that's why we just have to continue to make more.
Can I just say there's been so much anti-bisexual shit coming from fellow queer people online the past several months that it feels like somebody opened like a floodgate of resentment. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I get that there's some girl that you went to high school with who you find really, sorry, not high school, college. Mm-hmm. I get that there's some girl who you went to college with who you find really irritating. I also find her really irritating. But like, please do not let out your frustration at your like gay till graduation, you know, person that you dealt with on the rest of us, because like you have no right to say that it's inappropriate or appropriation if I want to use a they them pronoun, or that like, and I bring this up in the context of having a conversation around comic books because I'm seeing these conversations happening in pop culture adjacent, especially in horror adjacent and all that other stuff, like spaces that are like, this is happening. Like this sounds like Ilana's therapy time. I'm like, no, this is actually shit that people are writing about on my feed when I'm just trying to read about fucking comics, you know?
Yeah, totally.
And instead the punchline is like, bisexual women suck. It seems to be this like, I hope you haven't seen all of this. I hope you've been able to manicure your feed this way.
I mean,
but it's been exhausting.
I mean, I don't. The one thing that is like coming to mind that I saw that I definitely just had to like log off in a big way was like somebody doing that thing where they just like say the same thing over and over again in as many characters as it takes in the tweet, as if like saying it over and over again like then just like makes it true. It's like the internet equivalent of like insisting somebody's like insisting that bisexual people can't, I mean, they called it the D slur and the F slur. I'm just going to go ahead and say here in the show.
You should say that.
That they're talking about the words dyke and fag, and like the idea that a bisexual person has not been oppressed with those words or can't like choose to identify with those words. Like, I'm a dyke, and like nobody on the internet is gonna like tell me that I can't use the word dyke. Like, and anyway, it's annoying. It's annoying, and it's also, it's like, I guess we're all just like trying to work it out. I guess to like bring it back to the topic at hand today, I'm like, hey guys, why don't you try working these things out by like writing and producing your own, like your creator owned comic book series, because it's like done wonders for me. I figured everything out because of Safe Sex Terms of Service, available now wherever fine books and comic books are sold or borrowed from your local library.
Yeah, I mean, yes, to all of that. And like, you don't have to be precious about your terms. You can be precious about your relationships.
Yeah.
But, like right now, like we're dealing with our bodies being made illegal. Like they're trying to take trans kids who have parents have given, them the actual care and support they need, trying to take them away from their parents in Texas right now.
I know.
Like, and you don't have like a freaking purity fight on the internet. Just stop. So, yeah. Well, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being in profound solidarity and for writing art that, like, I'm telling you, this week it was such an interesting thing to have that this week because, like I said, it's just having big political existential crisis week and then thinking like I probably couldn't process this, but then actually, no, I can. And that was a complicated thing to be able to do.
I'm so happy about that for so many reasons. And one of them is that, sometimes I made the book that I wanted to make, and I do like sometimes have moments where I'm like, oh, are there going to be people who pick this up because they're excited that it's a queer story, and then they're going to be like, oh my god, the ultraviolence? Or are there going to be people who are like, ooh, cool, like some like horror sci-fi, I'm going to check this out, and they're going to be like, oh my god, there's fisting. And ultimately I hope that people, the people who were like maybe only interested in it for one reason, like come to love it for the other reason. But ideally what you just described is like what I want for people, that they can read this book in all of its like disturbing darkness and celebrations of pleasure, and just like find it cathartic in all of those ways, because like that's why I made it. I made it very collaboratively, but like that's what the genesis of this project is for me, because like both porn and horror and science fiction, I said both, but like all of the genres of like porn and horror and science fiction and melodrama all like give me catharsis and make me feel like less alone in the world, and make me feel like my struggles are like something shared, and make me feel less isolated. And so knowing that it gave you that experience is like the most that I could ever hope for.
Aw, thank you. Yeah. And I have a high threshold for all kinds of stuff, except for when I'm like really emotionally like done. And this, like, I was very emotionally done, and I could do it. That's like amazing. So readers, go buy SFSX, get it now from your local comic book store.
Absolutely.
Or if you must, you can also buy it from other things, but especially do you get to sell this at any, like at Good Vibrations and other like queer feminist sex stores and stuff?
Yes.
Is that like the dream?
As a matter of fact, it is literally available at the legendary, speaking of Bay Area, sex positive culture, icons. It is available at Good Vibrations, and yeah, there's a nice like crossover with the sort of more like sex positive world with this book. So yeah. Yeah,
I'm excited to hear that, like bringing the comics to everybody. And totally. Folks should be following you and listening to your podcast at Tina Horn's Ass. Very important.
Yes.
And thank you for joining the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It has been a pleasure to be back, and I love the show. I'm also a listener.
Aww.
And
it's amazing when I have like comics writers and fellow podcasters who are also listeners. It's like truly makes me feel vindicated is not the right word. Appreciated, valued.
Yes,
like it's a great compliment.
You are valued.
And, yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks for having me.
I will have you back, I hope, as well. So, and to Graphic Policy Radio listeners, yeah, there's more stuff coming. Keep listening and keep it geeky.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.